In Victorian Manchester, a city of 700,000 people lived in the shadow of industrial might, choking on coal smoke and working themselves to death for pennies a day, while grand municipal buildings showcased wealth and innovation. Just blocks away, families survived on potato hash and slept in 4-penny lodging houses. Behind the facade of Cottonopolis was a world Friedrich Engels described simply as hell on earth. Here's what life was really like in the slums of Victorian Manchester. Hey, quick thing before we start. If you actually listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. I always wonder where everyone's at, so comment your city and what time it is. Weird to think some of you are having breakfast in London while I'm recording this at night here in the States. Alright, tonight it's Victorian Manchester, but wait, are you comfortable? No, really. Check. Pillows, blankets, the whole deal. Where we're going, you'll want to be settled. Your eyes crack open to darkness. Not the comfortable darkness of your bedroom right now. This is different. This is the thick, suffocating darkness of a Manchester slum in 1900. The air is heavy with coal smoke that's crept through the cracks in the walls overnight. Your lungs feel it immediately. It's like breathing through a dirty rag soaked in soot. You're lying on, well, can you call it a bed? It's more like a pile of rags on a wooden floor. Your back aches from the hard surface. The rags smell of mildew and sweat. Bodies press against you. Other lodgers in this 4-penny doss house. The breathing and occasional coughs of strangers form a ragged symphony in the darkness. This is way worse than my memory foam mattress at home, you think, trying to adjust your position without disturbing the person sleeping inches away. The first hint of grey light filters through a small window caked with grime. It's enough to make out the bare walls of the lodging house. No pictures, no decorations, just stained plaster and exposed beams. In the corner, a man coughs violently, the sound wet and worrying. Picture this, Manchester in 1900, the second largest city in England. Population, a staggering 700,000 people. Only London and Glasgow were bigger. But size isn't everything, right? Manchester was the world's first industrial city, literally the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. They even had a nickname for it, Cottonopolis. I'm not making that up. The city grew so fast that nobody planned for it. People just poured in from everywhere. England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, all cramming into hastily built houses looking for work. And boy, was there work. Just not the kind that kept you alive very long. You pull yourself up from your rags, wincing at the stiffness in your joints. Your stomach gnaws with hunger, but breakfast is a distant dream. Most people here live on 6p a day for an entire family. That's about $2 in today's money. For everyone, for everything. I spent way too long researching Manchester food prices from this period, like concerningly long. The standard meal for a poor family was potato hash, 3p worth of meat, and I'm using the term meat generously here, 2p of potatoes and a halfpenny of onions. All boiled together with plenty of water, which they called dip. Delicious, right? The floor beneath your bare feet is cold and damp. There's mud tracked in from yesterday, never properly cleaned. The walls of the building seem to sweat with condensation. This is Angel Meadow, which has to be the most ironic name possible for one of Manchester's worst slums. You know what's wild? Friedrich Engels, yeah, the communist guy who worked with Marx, he actually lived here in Manchester for a while. His dad sent him to work in the cotton industry, and Engels was so horrified by what he saw that he wrote a whole book about it, called the city Hell Upon Earth. I'd say he was being kind. As you make your way outside, the full sensory assault of Manchester hits you. The journalist Robert Sherrod described it perfectly in 1900. Wait, I'll just give you his exact words. What more sinister picture could the mind conjure up than the black depths of the Owell seen through iron gratings when the afternoon sun in Manchester fog and smoke hangs over Deansgate like a disk of living fire? That's how this place looks. The sun isn't the warm yellow, you know. It's a bizarre, fiery disk hanging in a perpetual twilight of fog and factory smoke. It's like living in a painting by someone who was really, really depressed. You start walking through streets caked with mud. Around you, people are moving, most looking as tired as you feel. Workers heading to factories, children who should be in school but instead will spend their day in those same factories, women with hollow eyes carrying infants. "You need a cab, mate," a voice calls out. You turn to see a handsome cab driver looking at you skeptically. His horse paws at the ground, seeming as anxious as its owner. "Going to Angel Meadow," you say. The driver snorts. "Not likely," he says flatly. "Not likely that I'll take my cab up there to have it bashed in with bricks." That's an actual quote, by the way. Sherrod tried to get a cab to Angel Meadow, and that's what the driver told him. Some neighbourhoods were so rough that cab drivers wouldn't even go there. Just flat out refused. Can you imagine your Uber driver being like, "Yeah, no, I'd rather not have my car destroyed, thanks." So you keep walking, passing through an area known as the Jewish Quarter. The atmosphere is one of fog and rags, with mud underfoot. People mutter at street corners, their faces gaunt with hunger and worry. The shops you pass are miserable little establishments with barely anything to sell. Ahead looms a massive structure, the assize courts and adjoining jail. It's an imposing pile of stone, looking more like a fortress than a place of justice. Behind those walls are cells, the lash, and even gallows. Close to 177,000 prisoners pass through the gates of Strangeways Jail every year. 177,000 people. That's almost the entire population of Providence, Rhode Island passing through one jail every single year. But here's something that doesn't completely suck. Every morning at 6:30 in summer and 7:30 in winter, a group of ladies and gentlemen from various charitable societies gather at the prison gates. They're waiting for the prisoners to be released. They offer breakfast, conversation, prayer, and most importantly, help finding work. Small acts of kindness in a very unkind world. The smell hits you as you continue walking, a mix of industrial smoke, sewage, unwashed bodies, and the sickly sweet scent of cheap alcohol wafting from the doorways of dram shops, what they called bars or pubs. These places are already doing business, despite the early hour. For many, a quick drink is the only way to face another day in this place. You notice how many women are among the customers. In the smoke rooms of licensed houses, little else than racing results are being discussed. Betting on horses seems as common here amongst women as men. The Manchester police seem weirdly tolerant of gambling. During race week, card trick men are openly plying their swindles in the public omnibuses. You pause to watch one such scam in action. 3 cards being flipped and moved around on a makeshift table. A young lad is watching intently, convinced he can follow the Queen of Spades, except they're not using the Queen of Spades anymore. Find General Baden-Powell, the trickster calls out, using the hero of Mafeking as bait. Patriotism as the newest twist on an old scam. The boy puts down 30 shillings, a fortune for most people here, and of course loses it all. To what base uses, as Sherrard put it, has come the hero of Mafeking. The morning fog is starting to burn off, but the smoke remains, hanging over the city like a shroud. Your throat feels raw from breathing it. Your eyes sting. Welcome to the capital of the Industrial Revolution, the workshop of the world, the place where modern capitalism was born, one coughing child at a time. You follow a group of women walking toward the factories. Some look as young as 12 or 13, though it's hard to tell. Malnutrition has a way of making age ambiguous. They're heading to work as cigar makers, tailoresses, or in the textile mills. You overhear two women talking about wages. "Jenny's gotten on at the cigar factory," one says, "starting at 5 shillings a week." "Better than nothing," the other replies with a shrug, "though she'll be lucky to see 12 shillings even after her apprenticeship. Better than the apron trade, 6p a dozen and expected to make 48 a day. You do the math in your head. 48 aprons at 6p per dozen. That's 2 shillings a day, minus the cost of thread, light, and renting a sewing machine at 1 shilling 6p. How does anyone survive? The factory buildings loom ahead, massive brick structures belching smoke from tall chimneys. The sound grows as you approach, the thundering, pounding, relentless noise of machinery, the clattering of looms, the hissing of steam, the shouting of overseers. People stream toward the entrances, their faces set in resignation. Another day, another few pennies, another step closer to the grave or the workhouse or the jail. You watch as a mother kisses her young children goodbye at the factory gates. They're all going in, she to one department, they to another. The youngest looks about 6 years old. The contrast is bizarre. This same Manchester has grand buildings, wealthy merchants, cultural attractions. The city that's created such tremendous wealth also houses people who live on potato hash and 6p a day. The same place that built magnificent municipal structures also built the doss houses where hundreds cram together each night. As the factory bells ring the start of work, you see the massive doors close, swallowing the crowds of workers. The streets grow quieter, left to those too young, too old, or too sick to work, or those who make their living in other ways. The hawkers, the beggars, the thieves, the prostitutes. The morning has barely begun, but already you feel exhausted. Your lungs hurt, your stomach growls, your head aches from the noise and the smoke, and somewhere in your mind a small voice reminds you, for thousands of people, this wasn't a historical tour or a bad dream. This was every day. This was life. As the sun struggles to pierce the industrial haze, you find yourself wondering how anyone survived this, how they found moments of joy, of connection, of meaning in the shadow of the smokestacks, how they raised families and built communities and somehow kept going. And the truth is, many didn't survive. Many were broken by this place, by the work, the poverty, the disease, the drink, but others did survive. They endured, they fought back, they organised, they created mutual aid societies and unions and friendly societies. The streets are momentarily quiet as most have gone to work, but soon they'll flood again with the changing of shifts, the constant rhythm of industrial Manchester, the flow of bodies from slum to factory and back again. The machine never stops, the city never truly sleeps. As you stand there, taking in the enormity of industrial Manchester, you catch the eye of an elderly man sitting on a doorstep. His hands are gnarled from decades in the factories, his face lined and weathered, but there's something in his eyes, a spark, a resilience. "First time in Angel Meadow?" he asks with a knowing look. You nod, unsure what to say. "You get used to it," he says with a small ironic smile. "Or you don't. Either way, time keeps moving." He gestures toward the smoking chimneys that dominate the skyline. "Cottonopolis," he says with a bitter laugh. "That's what the fancy folk call it. To us, it's just home. Home. Such a simple word for such a complicated place. A place of suffering and survival. A place where people lived and died, loved and lost, struggled and sometimes even thrived, all in the shadow of the Industrial Revolution." The old man coughs, a deep rattling sound that speaks of years of breathing coal dust and cotton fibres. "Best be getting on," he says. "Day's wasting." As he hobbles away, you're left standing alone on the muddy street, the weight of Manchester pressing down like the smoke that hangs over everything. This is just the beginning of understanding what life was really like here. The day stretches ahead, full of more discoveries, more struggles, more glimpses into the lives of people who history often overlooks. The factory whistles sound in the distance, marking the passing of another hour in the relentless march of industrial time, and you realise you've only just begun to scratch the surface of what it meant to survive in the slums of Victorian Manchester. The factory whistles continue to blare across Manchester as you wander deeper into Angel Meadow. This place got its name back when it was actually a meadow, green, peaceful, a burial ground for the respectable poor. Now, it's one of the worst slums in Europe. The irony of the name isn't lost on you. You step carefully around a puddle of something that's definitely not water. The streets here aren't just dirty, they're deliberately neglected. City officials don't bother much with places like this. Why waste resources on people barely surviving? A small boy darts past you, barefoot despite the cold and damp. His feet are calloused and blackened from the filth. You notice his clothes, if you can call them that, more like rags barely held together, probably handed down through several siblings. "Penny for the guy, mister?" he asks, holding out a grimy palm. Before you can answer, a woman calls out sharply from a doorway. The boy scurries off without another word. The woman gives you a suspicious look before disappearing back inside. Strangers aren't welcome here, especially well-dressed ones who might be bill collectors, police, or worse, someone from the workhouse. You've read about workhouses in history books, but nothing prepares you for the fear they inspire in real life. The mere mention of the workhouse, or the spike, as locals call it, causes visible dread. Families would rather starve together than be separated in those prison-like institutions. There's a story going around about Kumpol Workhouse, where a pauper lunatic was beaten to death by an attendant. The case was so shocking that the Home Secretary issued a special order about reporting deaths of pauper lunatics in union workhouses. But people here aren't impressed, just another example of how little their lives matter to those in power. Your stomach growls, reminding you that breakfast would normally be happening about now. For the working poor of Manchester, breakfast is a luxury many skip entirely. Some children go to school or work without anything in their stomachs. Others might get a crust of bread or cold potatoes left over from yesterday. You decide to find somewhere to eat, if only to observe what passes for food here. Following your nose, you locate a small shop selling hot food. The smell is, well, not appetizing exactly, but it beats the general stench of the streets. Inside, people are crowded around small tables, hunched over bowls of steaming food. The air is thick with the smell of boiled potatoes and onions, with just a hint of meat. This is the famous potato hash, the staple meal for poor families. "What'll it be?" asks the woman behind the counter, eyeing you suspiciously. "Hash, please," you say, placing what you hope is the right amount of money on the counter. She scoops a ladleful of the mixture into a chipped bowl and slides it towards you with a chunk of bread that looks hard enough to build houses with. You take your meal to the corner and sit, examining what passes for nutrition here. The meat in the hash is unidentifiable, gristle and fat mostly, with the occasional stringy bit that might generously be called beef. The potatoes are decent enough, and the onions add some flavour. But it's the water, the dip as they call it, that bulks it up into something resembling a meal. A family sits nearby, mother, father, and 3 small children. They have a single bowl between them. The mother carefully portions it out, making sure each child gets something. The smallest amounts go to the parents. You've seen this before, adults going hungry so their children can eat. I actually found this in Robert Sherrod's reporting. He quotes from a Wesleyan mission report about food in Manchester slums. It was a common sight to see a large family sit down to a dinner of potato hash costing at the outside the sum of 6 pence, spent as follows. Meat 3 pence, potatoes 2 pence, halfpenny onions with plenty of water, or as they call it, dip. 6 pence for an entire family's main meal of the day. But here's the kicker, and this explains why so many stayed hungry. Most slum dwellers got everything on credit, which meant they paid extra for the privilege of not having immediate cash. A halfpenny more on a loaf of bread, a farthing on sugar, another halfpenny on tea. For large families, this credit system cost them an extra 2 shillings a week, when most were only bringing in 16 or 17 shillings total. Do the math. That's over 10% of their income just in credit surcharges. That's like you paying an extra $400 a month on your groceries just because you can't afford to pay up front. The food is bland but filling. As you eat, you listen to the conversations around you. Most revolve around work. Who's hiring? Who's been laid off? Which factories have reduced hours because of the wars? Textile trade's gone to hell, a man says bitterly. Used to send thousands of pieces a week to the east. Now, nothing. The Boer War and other conflicts have disrupted trade, and it's the workers who suffer first. You remember reading about how Manchester's cotton industry was devastated during the American Civil War too, when the Union blockaded southern cotton. The ripple effects of wars fought thousands of miles away are felt acutely in the stomachs of Manchester's poor. After finishing your meagre meal, you head back out into the streets. The factories will break for lunch soon, and you want to see what the lodging houses look like in daylight. Angel Meadows' 4-penny lodging houses are infamous. For the price of 4 pennies, you get a bed for the night. Though bed is a generous term. Really, you're paying for floor space and perhaps some rags to lie on. You approach one of the larger doss houses, a looming brick structure with small dirty windows. A sign indicates it has beds for over 400 people. Hard to imagine that many humans crammed into this space. To your surprise, the Manchester lodging houses are actually cleaner and more orderly than those in other cities Sherrod visited. You learn that no intoxicating liquor is allowed to be brought in, though judging by the state of most lodgers, they've had plenty before arriving. A man sits on the steps, taking a break from whatever work he's found for the day. His face is weathered, eyes sunken with exhaustion. First time in a doss house? He asks, noticing your interest. You nod. Could be worse, he says with a shrug. Better than the Spike, that's for certain. The Spike? You ask, playing dumb. Workhouse casual wards, he spits. Bloody awful places. Heard about what happened at Kumpol. Poor bastard beaten to death by some attendant. Now they got special orders from the Home Secretary about reporting deaths. He shakes his head. Like that'll change anything. As you chat, you notice a group gathering at a building down the street. The sign identifies it as part of the Wesleyan mission. They do good work, your companion says, following your gaze. Got a men's labour yard and casual ward. You can chop wood for your supper and bed. You decide to check it out. Approaching the central hall, the mission's headquarters, you see scores of men being interviewed by someone you later learn is Mr. Sackett, the head of this department. The system works differently than the workhouse. Here, men work before they're accommodated, chopping and tying firewood in the labour yard. 50 bundles earns you supper, a bed, and breakfast. As one mission worker puts it, they are not humiliated with the thought that they are receiving charity. It's an impressive operation. Last year they processed 738,000 bundles of firewood in this yard alone. Men are allowed to spend 2 nights in the Wesleyan Casual Ward while seeking work during the mornings. There's also a night refuge for women in Great Ancoat Street. Another group, the Aggressive League, works to waylay drunk men and convince them to reform. The name cracks you up. Imagine a bunch of zealous temperance workers physically tackling drunks to save their souls. Aggressive persistence is apparently their method. The Victorians didn't do subtlety. Speaking of drinking, the pubs, or dram shops as they're called, are starting to fill up as the lunch whistles sound. Despite the poverty, or perhaps because of it, Manchester has no shortage of places to drink. The doors of these establishments swing open, releasing bursts of noise, laughter, and the smell of beer and bodies. A group of women factory workers push past you, heading straight for one of the pubs. They'll have 30 minutes for lunch, and some choose to spend it with a quick drink rather than food. Can't really blame them considering the working conditions they'll return to. Cigar makers are known for drinking heavily. You remember reading that in the transcript. A girl working in the cigar trade earns between 5 and 12 shillings a week during her 3 to 5 year apprenticeship. A skilled worker might earn 17 to 20 shillings when working full-time. But full-time work is increasingly rare with the wars affecting trade. You follow the women into the pub, curious about this aspect of Manchester life. Inside, it's dark and smoky. The floor is sticky with spilled beer and tobacco juice. People are packed tightly around small tables, making the most of their brief break from the factories. At the bar, 2 women are discussing horse racing. They're comparing notes on the favourites for tomorrow's races at Manchester Racecourse. Gambling is as common among women here as men. Another fact from Sherrod's reporting. "Put a shilling on Red Admiral," one woman tells the other. "My Tom knows the stable boy, says the horse is looking prime. Can't afford to lose a shilling," her friend replies. "Kids need shoes." "Can't afford not to try," the first woman counters. "A 10-to-1 payout would buy shoes for all your little ones and then some." The desperate mathematics of poverty gambling. When you have almost nothing, risking a little for the chance of something more feels rational. The wealthy call it vice or moral failing. The poor call it hope. You notice a man setting up a small table in the corner. He places 3 cards face down and begins a swift, practiced patter. It's the 3-card trick, a notorious swindle. The Manchester police seem remarkably tolerant of such obvious grifts. "Find the Queen," he calls out, but then corrects himself with a grin. "No, lads and lasses, today we're looking for the hero of Mafeking, find General Baden-Powell and double your money." The Boer War has been going for months now, and the 217-day siege of Mafeking has made Colonel Baden-Powell a national hero. The fact that he's now being used to separate factory workers from their hard-earned wages is a special kind of cynicism. You watch as a young man confidently places 2 shillings on the table. He's sure he knows which card is Baden-Powell. Of course, he loses. The cards move faster than the eye can follow, manipulated by hands that have performed this trick thousands of times. Back outside, the lunch break is ending. Workers stream back toward the factories, their brief respite over. You decide to follow them, curious about the working conditions that define so much of life here. The textile mills dominate Manchester's economy, but there are countless other industries too. The tailoring trade employs 4,000 to 5,000 women in Manchester, and their average weekly wages don't exceed 9 shillings, even allowing for seasonal fluctuations. They work under the same conditions as the tailoresses of Leeds. You recall Sherrod's bitter reference to the Song of the Shirt, a poem written in 1843 about a seamstress living in wretched conditions, being sung nightly in hundreds of garrets and cellar kitchens throughout Manchester and Salford. You join the stream of workers heading toward a large factory building. The noise grows as you approach, a thundering, clattering cacophony of machinery that you feel in your chest as much as hear with your ears. At the entrance, a supervisor eyes you suspiciously, but says nothing as you slip inside with the crowd. The heat hits you first, a wall of hot, humid air thick with cotton fibres and human sweat. Then the noise overwhelms everything, the pounding of looms, the hissing of steam, the shouts of overseers barely audible above the mechanical roar. Women and children make up much of the workforce. They move with practiced efficiency between the machines, their hands never stopping. One slip could mean losing fingers or worse. There are no safety guards on these machines, no regulations to protect the workers. Accidents are common and compensation rare. You spot a young girl, no more than 12, deftly reaching into a spinning machine to clear a jam. Her thinness allows her to access parts of the machinery adults can't reach. Her face shows no fear, just the blank concentration of someone who does this dozens of times a day. The air is filled with cotton fibres. Cotton snow, they call it. Workers breathe this in for 10 to 12 hours a day, their lungs gradually filling with the debris of their labour. Many develop brown lung or byssinosis, a chronic, debilitating condition that slowly suffocates them from the inside. You don't need to be a doctor to spot the signs. The constant coughing, the shortness of breath, the pallor beneath the grime on their faces. Life expectancy for factory workers is decades shorter than for the middle and upper classes. Near the back of the factory floor, women are operating sewing machines, making clothing that will be sold for many times what they're paid to produce it. The mathematics are brutal. A woman making aprons can produce 48 a day at 6 pence per dozen. That's 2 shillings a day, 40, before deducting the cost of thread, light and the rental of the sewing machine at 1 shilling and 6 pence, left with just 6 pence for a full day's labour. How does anyone survive? As you watch, a supervisor marches over to a woman who's paused briefly to flex her cramping hands. His face is red with anger as he berates her for laziness. Around them, no one reacts, keeping their heads down, hands moving, avoiding becoming the next target. You slip back outside, lungs burning from the cotton fibres, ears ringing from the noise. The contrast between the grand municipal buildings downtown and these factories is stark. The wealth created here flows upward, leaving those who generate it with barely enough to survive. Back on the street, you notice a small crowd gathered around a man on a soapbox. He's talking passionately about workers' rights, about the need for strong unions, about the exploitation that drives Manchester's economy. "They get rich on our backs," he shouts, pointing toward the city centre where the owners and managers live in comfort. "They send us to die in their factories, in their mines, in their wars. And for what? 6 pence a day and an early grave?" Some in the crowd cheer. Others look nervous, glancing around for police or factory spies who might report them. Organising is dangerous. You can lose your job, your home, even your life if you push too hard against the system. But things are changing. The unions are growing stronger. The socialist movement is gaining momentum. The workers are beginning to understand their collective power. The Manchester of 1900 is a city on the edge of transformation, though few can see it yet. As the afternoon wears on, you make your way toward London Road Station, following the path that Sherrod took. Along the way, you witness a scene that encapsulates the human cost of industrial Manchester, a scene the journalist himself described. A respectable workman is seeing his wife and young daughter off at the station. All three are crying openly as they say goodbye. The woman explains through tears, "We have never been parted before, and now we are to be separated for months and months. We have had to give over our housekeeping, and I am going back to my father." Her husband is a mason's labourer, earning 5 shillings and 2 pence an hour. Their rent was 5 shillings and 6 pence, an impossible mathematics that broke their family apart. The woman's poverty is revealed a moment later when she says, "Oh, but a cup of tea would do me good and put a little heart into me, but how can I afford the 4 pence?" In the same compartment sits a tailor master who earlier boasted that, supposing a girl's quick with her fingers, she can make 7 shillings a week at the buttonholes in my shop. Now he produces a flask and offers it to the crying woman. "Have a drop of scotch, my dear." This moment, this simple human interaction, speaks volumes about life in Manchester. The economic forces tearing families apart, the small kindnesses that make survival possible, the impossible choices people face daily. As the train pulls away, carrying the woman and child back to her father's home, you're left standing on the platform, surrounded by the sounds and smells of industrial Manchester. The sun is lowering in the sky, casting long shadows through the perpetual haze of smoke. Night is approaching, bringing new dangers, new struggles, and perhaps a few precious moments of rest for those lucky enough to have a bed to return to. The doss houses will fill soon with those seeking shelter from the coming darkness. You realise you've only begun to understand what survival means in this place. The day-to-day challenges of finding food, keeping warm, earning enough to pay the rent, the constant presence of illness, accident and early death, the small victories and devastating defeats that make up life in the shadow of the smokestacks. As you leave the station, you notice a group of children playing in a narrow alley using a stick and some rags to create a makeshift ball. Their laughter echoes against the brick walls, a reminder that even here, in this harsh landscape of industrial poverty, humanity finds ways to create joy. But the laughter stops abruptly as a factory whistle pierces the air. The shift is changing. The rhythm of Manchester continues its relentless beat. The factory whistles have fallen silent now, marking the end of the day shift. Workers stream out of the massive brick buildings, their shoulders hunched with exhaustion, faces grey with cotton dust and fatigue. The streets grow busy again as thousands make their way home, if you can call their lodgings home. You decide to follow a group of women walking toward Ancoats, another notorious slum district. They move slowly, their bodies worn down by hours of standing at machines. You can tell which industry they work in just by looking at them. The cigar makers with tobacco-stained fingers, the textile workers with bits of cotton clinging to their hair and clothes, the laundresses with reddened, cracked hands from constant exposure to harsh soaps and hot water. One woman catches you staring and gives you a weary smile. "First time in Manchester?" she asks. You nod and she gestures around. "Welcome to the workshop of the world," she says with tired sarcasm. "Not what you expected. I'm just trying to understand how people live here." You admit. She gives a bitter laugh. "Live? We don't live, love. We survive. There's a difference." Her name is Mary, and she works as a tailor's machinist, one of the better-paying jobs for women. She earns between 11 and 14 shillings a week, which is practically wealth compared to some. She tells you she's machining trousers that will be sold in fancy shops for 13 shillings a pair, while she gets paid 6pence for each one she completes. Do the math, she says as you walk alongside her. I make 25 pairs a week if I'm quick. That's 12 and 6. Shop sells them for, what's that, over 300 shillings, and I get 12 and 6. She shakes her head, too tired to even be properly angry anymore. This is just how things are. Where do you live? You ask. Got a room, she says. Share with my sister and her kid. 5 and 6 a week. 5 shillings and 6pence just for rent. This hits me hard when I researched it. When most women were making 9 to 12 shillings a week, spending 5 and 6 on rent alone left almost nothing for food, clothing, heating, lighting, everything else. You remember a scene from the transcript. A mason's labourer earning 5 and 2 pence an hour, whose family had to separate because they couldn't afford their rent of 5 and 6. The mathematics of survival in Manchester are brutal and unforgiving. Mary leads you down a narrow street lined with identical brick houses. They stand shoulder to shoulder. No gardens, no space between them, just an endless wall of grimy brick broken by doors and small windows. These are the famous back-to-backs, houses built literally back-to-back to save space, with rooms stacked vertically instead of horizontally. 6 families in our house, Mary explains as she stops before one of the identical doors. 2 rooms each if you're lucky, some just got the one. Landlord keeps dividing them up, more rent that way. The door opens to a narrow hallway with steep stairs leading up. The smell hits you immediately, a mixture of cooking, damp human bodies and the ever-present coal smoke that permeates everything in Manchester. We're top floor, Mary says, leading the way up the creaking stairs. It's cold in winter, hot in summer, but at least we don't get the rats as bad as the ground floor. Each landing has 2 doors leading to separate lodgings. You can hear life happening behind them. Children crying, a couple arguing, someone coughing that deep, wet cough that speaks of cotton lung or tuberculosis. Mary's room, when you reach it, is small but meticulously clean. There's a single bed that she presumably shares with her sister and niece, a small table with 2 chairs, a chest for clothes, and a tiny fireplace where a kettle sits cold. A curtain divides the room, behind which you assume is another small space, perhaps for washing or food preparation. Sister's on night shift at the factory, Mary explains. Niece is at the match factory, won't be home till late. Match factories are notorious for phosphorus poisoning. Phossy jaw, they call it. The workers' jawbones literally decay while they're still alive, causing unimaginable pain. But the factories pay, and when you're poor in Manchester, you take what work you can get. Mary stokes the small fireplace, trying to bring some warmth into the room. Can't afford much coal, she says apologetically, just enough to heat water for tea. The windows are covered with paper to keep out drafts. Glass alone isn't enough against the bitter Manchester weather. The walls show water stains where rain has seeped through the poorly maintained roof. How much do other people pay for rooms, you ask, curious about the rental market in 1900 Manchester? Depends, she says, putting the kettle on the growing flames. Single room in a cellar might go for 2 shillings. Proper 2-room lodging like this, 5 to 7 shillings typically. More if it's a better street, less if it's Angel Meadow or the worst parts. She gestures for you to sit at the small table. Of course, some people can't afford even that. They go to the doss houses, 4 pence a night for a bed, but you can't make a home there. Home. Such a powerful concept when you have so little else. Mary has made this tiny space as homely as possible. A cheap print on the wall, a small vase with what look like hand-picked wildflowers, a crocheted doily on the table, small touches of humanity in an inhumane system. The kettle begins to whistle, and Mary makes tea in a chipped pot. The tea is weak, the leaves clearly reused several times to make them last, but it's hot and marginally better than the water that comes from Manchester's questionable pipes. Sugar? She offers, showing you a small bowl with what can't be more than a tablespoon of sugar in it. No, thank you, you say, understanding this is a precious commodity you shouldn't deplete. As you sip the tea, Mary tells you about working in the textile industry. The Manchester cotton mills were once the wonder of the industrial world, but the wars have hit trade hard. Houses that used to send thousands of fabric pieces weekly to the east now send nothing at all. My cousin got laid off last week, she says. Whole factory shut down. Hundreds of women with no work, no warning, no nothing. What will they do, you ask? Mary shrugs. What can they do? Try to find other work, go to the doss houses if they can't pay rent, to the workhouse if they're desperate enough. Or, she doesn't finish, but you both know what the unspoken options are. Crime, prostitution, starvation. This brings up something I found disturbing in my research. Do you know the stat in the transcript? Close to 177,000 prisoners pass through the gates of Strangeways Jail every year in a city of 700,000. That's 1 in 4 people. Not all at once, of course. Many were repeat offenders and many were just short stays, but still, the scale of incarceration is mind-boggling. And according to the secretary of the Discharged Prisoners Aid Society, in nearly every case which the society has had to deal with, intemperance was the primary cause of the prisoners' downfall. Drinking to escape the horrors of industrial poverty, then crime to support the drinking or due to its effects. A vicious cycle. A knock at the door interrupts your conversation. Mary opens it to reveal a small girl, perhaps 9 or 10, holding a basket covered with a cloth. Mum says, can she borrow a cup of tea leaves? The girl says, her eyes darting curiously to you. She'll give them back tomorrow when Dad gets paid. Course, Lucy, Mary says, taking a pinch of already used tea leaves and wrapping them in a scrap of paper. How's your mum's cough? Same, the girl says, with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who's seen too much illness. Doctor says she needs better food and rest. She gives a small, adult snort that has no place coming from a child's mouth. Might as well say she needs a castle and a carriage. Mary slips something else into the girl's basket, a small heel of bread you didn't notice before. Tell her I had extra, she says firmly when the girl starts to protest. After Lucy leaves, Mary explains. Her mum's got the consumption. Dad works at the docks when there's work. 3 little ones besides her, they're good people, would do the same for me. This is how survival works in Manchester's slums. Nobody has enough, but they share what little they have. A cup of tea leaves, a heel of bread, watching a neighbour's children, tending the sick. Small acts of community that make the unbearable slightly more bearable. As evening deepens, Mary needs to prepare for her sister and niece's return. You thank her for the tea and hospitality, promising to visit again. Back on the street, the gas lamps have been lit, casting pools of yellowish light that barely penetrate the Manchester fog. Evening brings a different energy to the slums. Those who work day shifts are home, tired, but briefly free. The pubs are filling up, the warm glow from their windows and the sound of music and voices offering a temporary escape from the grim reality outside. You pass a group of men heading into one such establishment, the Factory Workers' Arms. They look like they've come straight from the foundry, their faces still streaked with soot, hands rough and calloused. Despite their obvious exhaustion, there's an air of relief about them. They've survived another day. Joining us, mate? One calls to you. First round's on Jim. His wife had another baby yesterday. The man called Jim grins proudly, despite the bags under his eyes. 6th one, another boy. The others clap him on the back with genuine congratulations, though you can't help wondering how Jim will feed another mouth on a factory worker's wages. Still, life goes on. Babies are born, people marry, families grow, even here in the shadow of the smokestacks. You decide to follow them in, curious about how the working class spend their limited leisure time. The pub is crowded, hot and loud. Men and women of all ages pack the space, creating a din of conversation that competes with a man playing fiddle in the corner. The drinks are cheap and strong, designed to provide maximum escape for minimum cost. You notice how quickly people drink, like they're trying to outrun their thoughts. In one corner, you spot a heated discussion about horse racing. Several men are poring over racing forms, pooling their knowledge and meagre betting money. Manchester police turn a blind eye to gambling, says a voice beside you. You turn to see an older man nursing a pint of dark beer. Not like in Liverpool where they crack down. Here, you can bet openly. That a good thing, you ask. He shrugs. Depends who you ask. Gives people hope, doesn't it? Dream of a big win to change everything. He takes a long drink. Course the bookies get rich while the rest of us stay poor. But for a moment, that moment when your horse is leading, you're as rich as the Queen. Across the room, a fight nearly breaks out when someone accuses another of cheating at cards. Friends intervene, pulling the men apart. The incident blows over quickly, the community policing itself. Nobody wants the actual police coming in and ruining everyone's brief escape. Near the bar, a group of women factory workers are celebrating something. Their laughter rises above the general noise as they clink glasses. One stands on a chair and makes a toast. To Mary Evans, 10 years in that hellhole, and now she's getting out, getting married and moving to her Tom's place in the country. A cheer goes up. Escape from Manchester is worth celebrating, even if it's just trading one form of dependence for another. For women, marriage can be both prison and salvation, depending entirely on the husband's character and earnings. You notice a table in the back where serious-looking men are talking in low voices. From snatches of conversation, you realise they're union organisers, planning their next move against one of the larger factories. They're careful, watchful, aware that spies might be anywhere. The labour movement is growing stronger, but it's a dangerous game. Workers who organise risk everything. Companies have spies, hired thugs, and the law on their side. Still, conditions are so bad that more and more are willing to take the risk. As the evening wears on, songs break out. Old folk songs from Ireland, Scotland, Wales and the English countryside, places many of these workers or their parents left in search of factory work. Songs of home, of lost love, of better days. For a few minutes, the hard edges of Manchester life soften under the influence of music, alcohol and shared experience. But all too soon, the landlord calls time. The pub will close, sending its patrons back to their crowded rooms, shared beds, and brief sleep before another day in the factories. Outside, the night has fully settled over Manchester. The smoke and fog create a thick blanket that muffles light and sound. Gas lamps create islands of dim yellow illumination, between which lie pools of absolute darkness. These dark spaces are dangerous. Robberies are common. Drunks might be beaten and relieved of whatever coins remain in their pockets. Women hurry in groups for safety, even those engaged in the oldest profession who have no choice but to work these dangerous streets. You follow a family heading home. Father, mother, and 3 small children who should have been in bed hours ago but had nowhere to go while their parents worked. The youngest, a girl of perhaps 4, is asleep in her father's arms, her head lolling against his shoulder. "We'll be home soon, love," the mother says, urging the other 2 children to hurry. "Mind the puddles now." Home is a single room in a crumbling building. As the door opens, you glimpse the interior. One bed for all 5 of them, a small table, a hearth with no fire this late at night. The walls are damp with condensation. The ceiling sags ominously. But it's theirs, at least for now, as long as they can pay the rent. Not everyone is so fortunate. As you continue walking, you pass people bedding down in doorways, under bridges, in the shelter of market stalls, the truly destitute who can't even afford the 4 pence for a doss house. Near the river, the polluted earwell that Sherrod described as seen through iron gratings when the afternoon sun in Manchester fog and smoke hangs over Deansgate like a disk of living fire. A group of children are still awake, searching for anything valuable in the mud of the banks. "Find anything good?" you ask one boy who can't be more than 8. He holds up a sodden piece of coal triumphantly. "Enough for morning fire," he says. Then, more quietly, "If you're looking for Maggie's girls, they're under the bridge. 6pence for a quick one." You're shocked by his matter-of-fact tone, by the casual way he assumes you're looking for prostitutes, by how normal this is in his world. Child labour, child prostitution, child poverty. The most vulnerable suffer most in industrial Manchester. "Just exploring," you say, "trying to understand how people live here." The boy laughs, a harsh adult sound. "Live? Nobody lives here, mister. We just don't die." It's eerily similar to what Mary said earlier. Not living, just surviving, not dying. The bar for success set at its most basic level. As midnight approaches, even the streets begin to empty. Night shift workers head toward factories and warehouses, while day workers collapse into whatever passes for a bed, stealing a few precious hours of rest before it all begins again. You find yourself back near Angel Meadow, where the doss houses are now full. Through windows you can see bodies packed tightly on floors, on benches, on narrow cots. Humanity warehoused like the cotton that drives Manchester's economy. Outside one such establishment, an old woman sits bundled in rags, rocking slightly. She looks up as you pass, her face a map of hardship etched over decades. "No room at the inn," she says with grim humour. "Not for those without the 4 pence. You're spending the night out here, you ask, concerned. The night is cold, damp, and dangerous. She shrugs. "Not my first night on the cobbles. Might not be my last. Unless it is, in which case, problem solved." Her fatalism is startling but understandable. At her age, having survived decades in industrial Manchester, what can still frighten her? She's seen children die of preventable diseases, men crushed in industrial accidents, women worked to exhaustion then discarded. She's lived through economic booms that never reached the poor and busts that hit them first and hardest. "God's waiting room, this city," she says, looking around at the dark streets. "Just some of us get called sooner than others." As you leave her to her philosophical musings, you notice the factories never truly go silent. The night shift keeps some of them running 24 hours a day, the distant thrum of machinery a constant soundtrack to Manchester life. The moon, when it briefly appears through a gap in the smoke and clouds, seems alien and distant, as though even it wants nothing to do with what humans have created here. The contrast between its cold, clean light and the grimy streets below couldn't be starker. Tomorrow, it all begins again. The day shift workers will rise before dawn, eating whatever meagre breakfast they can afford. Children will head to factories, workshops, or if they're lucky, school. Women will report to textile mills, cigar factories, and tailor shops. Men will go to foundries, construction sites, docks and warehouses. The great machine of industrial Manchester will continue its relentless operation, creating vast wealth for a few, while the many simply try to survive another day. And yet, despite everything, despite the poverty, the exploitation, the dirt, the disease, people endure. They create families, communities, moments of joy. They share what little they have. They tell jokes, sing songs, fall in love, dream of better days. The human spirit, it seems, is harder to crush than even the harshest industrial city can manage. As you seek shelter for what remains of the night, this thought provides a small comfort against the overwhelming evidence of suffering you've witnessed. Tomorrow will bring new insights into how life functions in this remarkable, terrible place, this engine room of the British Empire, this workshop of the world, this hell upon earth that somehow thousands still call home. Morning breaks over Manchester like a half-hearted apology. The sun, what little of it penetrates the smoke and fog, brings no warmth, just enough light to remind everyone it's time to start again. The factories are already humming, many never stopped. You find yourself in a small cafe near the market where working people grab quick meals before heading to their shifts. The food is cheap and filling, mostly bread and potatoes with small amounts of meat for those who can afford it. The tea is strong enough to dissolve the spoon, necessary fuel for bodies that must work 12 or more hours today. A woman at the next table is feeding her children, two small boys who look too young for school, let alone work, though you suspect that's where they're headed. She carefully divides a single portion between them, taking nothing for herself. "Eat up now," she tells them. "Need your strength for the mill." As they eat, she notices you watching and gives a tired smile. "First day?" she asks, assuming you're a new worker. "Just visiting," you admit, trying to understand how people live here. She looks at you like you've said something incomprehensible. "Live? We don't live, love. We work, we sleep, we try not to die. That's all." It's the third time you've heard this sentiment expressed in almost identical words. Not living, just not dying. Survival as the baseline for success. "Boys started at the mill last month," she continues, nodding at her children. 6 and 8 they are, too young really, but their father's dead, accident at the foundry, and someone's got to bring in wages. Child labour laws exist in 1900 but are loosely enforced, especially when desperate families need every penny. Mills and factories prefer children for certain jobs. Their small hands can reach into machinery to clear jams or clean moving parts, tasks too dangerous for adults. Children earn a fraction of adult wages, making them desirable employees. "They're good boys," she says with fierce pride. "Never complain, even when they're dead tired. Bring home 4 shillings a week between them. Not much, but it's the difference between eating and not. 4 shillings, that's the price of childhood in industrial Manchester. The opportunity to learn, to play, to grow naturally, all sacrificed for basic survival." After breakfast, you decide to learn more about how children experience Manchester life. You head toward a school located in one of the slightly better working-class districts. Not all children work. Education is technically compulsory, though economic necessity often trumps legal requirements. The school is a stark brick building with small windows and an austere playground of packed dirt. Children file in, some clearly underfed, many in clothing that's patched and repatched. Their faces show a mix of childhood innocence and premature aging, eyes that have seen too much, too soon. The headmaster, a stern but not unkind man named Mr. Wilkins, allows you to observe classes after you claim to be researching educational methods. The classrooms are overcrowded, with children packed onto benches. The emphasis is on basic literacy, numeracy, and above all discipline, preparing children for lives of factory work and obedience. "Our greatest challenge," Mr. Wilkins tells you during a break, "is simply getting them here. When a family must choose between education and eating, it's no choice at all. We lose them to the mills, the mines, the street trades." He sighs, watching children play in the yard, their games surprisingly boisterous despite their circumstances. Then there's the health issues: tuberculosis, rickets, chronic malnutrition, children falling asleep in class because they work night shifts or share beds with multiple siblings. How can they learn under such conditions? A small girl approaches, tugging at Mr. Wilkins' coat. "Sir, Tommy's fainted again," she says matter-of-factly. The headmaster nods, unsurprised. His family was evicted last week. I suspect he hasn't eaten since yesterday's school meal. He excuses himself to attend to the child, leaving you to ponder the normality of children collapsing from hunger in this wealthy industrial nation. After leaving the school, you head toward the Wesleyan Mission's central hall that you glimpsed yesterday. Charity organisations are the main safety net in Victorian Manchester, stepping in where government action fails. The central hall is a bustle of activity. Here, the Wesleyan Mission coordinates its many programmes: the men's labour yard, the casual ward, the night refuge for women, the aggressive league that targets drunkenness, and more. Their annual report fills over 300 pages, a testament to both their dedication and the overwhelming need they address. You meet Mr. Sackett, mentioned in Sherrod's reporting as the head of the men's department. He's interviewing applicants for the labour yard, homeless or unemployed men seeking the chance to earn their keep by chopping firewood. Our system differs from the casual ward in the workhouses, he explains during a break. Our men work before they're accommodated, which is as much as to say that they pay in advance for what they get. They aren't humiliated with the thought that they're receiving charity. You ask about the success of this approach. I have a high admiration of the class that come into our hands, he says with genuine respect, and of their anxiety to work. Last year, 738,000 bundles of firewood were chopped and bundled in the Hood Street labour yard. That number is staggering, a glimpse into both the scale of need and the willingness of people to work when given the opportunity. These aren't the lazy, shiftless poor of middle-class mythology. They're people desperate for dignified ways to survive. You follow Mr. Sackett to the labour yard itself, a large space where dozens of men are hard at work, chopping, splitting and bundling firewood. The system is simple: chop and tie 50 bundles by 5 p.m. and you've earned supper, a bed for the night and breakfast the next morning. The men work with quiet determination, some clearly experienced labourers temporarily down on their luck, others looking less accustomed to physical work, perhaps clerks or shop assistants who've lost their positions, all united by immediate need. Many have skills and trades, Mr. Sackett tells you, but work is inconsistent, especially with the wars affecting trade. We allow men to stay 2 nights while seeking employment during the days. The difference between this and the dreaded workhouse is striking. Here there's an atmosphere of mutual respect. The men aren't treated as morally deficient paupers, but as workers temporarily in need of assistance. It's a small but crucial distinction that preserves dignity. From the labour yard, you visit the night refuge for women in Great Ancoats Street, another Wesleyan Mission programme. The refuge offers safe overnight accommodation for women who would otherwise be on the streets, vulnerable to violence and exploitation. Mrs. Porter, who oversees the refuge, shows you the dormitory-style rooms with their neat rows of narrow beds. We can accommodate 50 women and children, she explains. We're full every night with more turned away. The need far exceeds our capacity. The women who stay here come from various circumstances: workers between lodgings, women fleeing abusive husbands, mothers with children evicted for rent arrears, young women newly arrived in Manchester seeking work. Many are in temporary crisis, Mrs. Porter says. A week's unpaid wages, a sudden illness, an unexpected expense, that's all it takes to lose your lodgings when you're living on the edge. We provide a safe landing, a chance to stabilise before they fall further. As you talk, a young woman enters, carrying a baby wrapped in a thin blanket. Her face is tear-streaked, her clothes respectable but worn. Mrs. Porter excuses herself to speak with her privately, but you overhear enough to understand. The woman's husband has died, leaving her without income or support. The landlord has already rented their room to another family. She has nowhere to go. This scenario plays out countless times daily across Manchester. The absence of any meaningful social safety net means a single misfortune can catapult a family from precarious stability into complete destitution. Later, you visit another charity initiative, a soup kitchen run by a coalition of churches. Long lines have formed outside, people of all ages waiting patiently for what might be their only hot meal of the day. The atmosphere is subdued, marked by the particular quiet dignity of those who never expected to need charity. A volunteer named George, who ladles soup into bowls with mechanical efficiency, tells you they serve over 500 meals daily. Used to be mostly single men, he says. Now we see whole families. The textile trade suffering with the wars. Houses that sent thousands of pieces weekly to the east now send nothing. Workers are the first to feel it. George has worked in the soup kitchen for 3 years. He was once on the other side of the counter, a skilled machinist laid off during a previous economic downturn. I know what it's like, he says simply, to work hard all your life and still end up hungry. As the afternoon progresses, you decide to visit one of Manchester's immigrant communities. The city's industrial growth attracted not just rural British workers, but people from across Europe and beyond, each group developing its own survival strategies within the larger struggle. The Jewish quarter, which Sherrod mentioned passing through, has its own distinct character, a community simultaneously integrated into Manchester's economy, yet maintaining its separate identity and mutual support systems. In a small workshop off a narrow street, you meet Isaac, a tailor who employs several family members making men's suits. The space is cramped but meticulously organised, with bolts of fabric stacked along one wall and a row of sewing machines along another. Business is not what it was, Isaac tells you, measuring cloth with practised precision. The war affects everyone, but we manage. Our community looks after its own. This is a crucial survival strategy in Manchester. Tight-knit ethnic and religious communities that pool resources, share information about jobs, and support members in crisis. The Jewish community has established its own charitable organisations, loan societies, and educational programmes, parallel structures to navigate a system often hostile to outsiders. Isaac explains how recent immigrants typically start at the bottom, sweatshop work, street vending, rag collecting, before gradually establishing themselves in trades or small businesses. My father sold buttons from a cart when he first came, he says with pride. Now I have this workshop. My son studies bookkeeping at night school. Each generation climbs a little higher. This pattern of gradual advancement through generations is common among immigrant communities with strong family and community bonds. It's a long-term survival strategy that requires enormous sacrifice from the first generation. As you leave the Jewish quarter, you notice a group gathering outside a meeting hall. A hand-painted sign announces, "Workers meeting tonight. All trades welcome. Unity is strength." This is another form of collective survival, the growing labour movement. As individual workers have almost no power against factory owners, they're increasingly organising along trade lines and across industries. Inside the hall, about 100 people have gathered, mostly men, but with a significant number of women too. The atmosphere is charged with purpose. These aren't dejected victims, but workers actively fighting to improve their conditions. The speaker, a weaver named Robert, addresses the crowd with passionate intensity. They tell us we should be grateful for our jobs, grateful for 12 hours of danger and exhaustion, grateful for wages that don't feed our children. Well, I say it's the owners who should be grateful for the wealth our hands create, for the profits built on our broken bodies. The crowd responds with cheers and applause. The message resonates because it speaks to their daily experience. They know who creates Manchester's wealth and who reaps its benefits. Alone, we are nothing, Robert continues. Together, we have the power to shut down every mill, every factory, every warehouse in this city. Without our labour, their machines are just metal and wood. Never forget that power. This is the beginning of a transformation, workers recognising their collective strength and organising to demand better conditions. It's a slow, dangerous process, fraught with setbacks. Union organisers risk blacklisting, violence and imprisonment, but the momentum is building. After the formal meeting ends, smaller groups form to discuss specific issues: a planned strike at one factory, fundraising for workers fired for organising, coordinating with unions in other cities. There's a sense of purpose and solidarity that stands in stark contrast to the isolated struggle for survival you've witnessed elsewhere. A woman named Sarah, who works as a power loom weaver, explains the practical realities. We're asking for a halfpenny more per piece and safety guards on the machines. Lost 3 fingers last month in our section alone. They'll fight us hard, already threatening to bring in workers from outside. But we're prepared. The whole mill stands together this time. This isn't just about wages, it's about human dignity, about being seen as people rather than disposable components in the industrial machine, about having some control over the conditions that define their lives. As evening approaches, you make your way toward Deansgate, one of Manchester's main thoroughfares, where the stark divisions of the city become most visible. Here, the commercial establishments that serve the middle and upper class stand in proximity to the poverty just blocks away. The Palatine Hotel, mentioned in Sherrod's description of the view to the River Irwell, represents one face of Manchester, the prosperous commercial city of merchants, manufacturers and professionals. Its well-lit windows and elegant facade seem to belong to a different world than Angel Meadow or Ancoats. From here, you can see what Sherrod described, looking through iron gratings to the black depths of the Irwell while the setting sun appears as a disk of living fire through the perpetual fog and smoke. It's a haunting image that captures the environmental devastation of industrial Manchester. The polluted river, the smoke-filled air, the constant haze that filters all light into something alien and unnatural. As darkness falls, you notice how the city segregates itself, not just spatially, but temporally. The commercial and financial districts empty as offices close. The more prosperous residential areas settle into domestic evenings behind drawn curtains. Meanwhile, the slums enter their most active and dangerous phase. You return to Angel Meadow as night takes hold. The doss houses are filling again, those who can afford the 4 pence securing their spots for the night. Outside, those without even that small sum gather in doorways or under bridges, creating makeshift communities for mutual protection. The pubs are doing brisk business, offering light, warmth and temporary escape. Music spills into the street from one establishment, a folk song about lost rural homes that carries a particular poignancy in this urban wasteland. Near the entrance to one doss house you meet an elderly man named William, who's been in Manchester for over 40 years. He came from a small village in Yorkshire during the cotton boom, believing the city offered opportunity and advancement. Reality proved harsher. Or used to be worse, he tells you, which is difficult to imagine. Back in the 40s and 50s, now that was hard times. No regulations at all then. Children as young as 5 in the factories. No limits on hours, no safety measures, nothing. He's right. Conditions have improved somewhat since the mid-19th century. Various factory acts have gradually imposed minimal regulations on working hours, child labour and safety. It's a reminder that even this grim reality represents progress from the early industrial period. Lot of good people tried to help, William continues. Lord Shaftesbury fought for the 10 hours bill, got it passed too, though owners found ways around it. Still, it was something. Started the ball rolling. This perspective is important. The Manchester you're seeing is a place of terrible hardship, but also of ongoing struggle and incremental improvement. Workers and reformers have fought for decades to win even the minimal protections that exist in 1900. As you talk with William, a commotion erupts down the street. A group of men surround someone on the ground. William shakes his head. Saturday night. Payday for some. Someone got rolled for their wages, I expect. The casualness with which he views this violence speaks volumes about its normality. In a community where everyone lives on the edge, those who fall into addiction or desperation often prey on others barely more fortunate than themselves. It's a cruel mathematics where taking from others seems the only way to survive. The police rarely bother with crimes in these neighbourhoods unless they threaten to spill into more respectable areas. Justice, like everything else in Manchester, operates differently depending on one's social position. As the night deepens, you find yourself reflecting on all you've witnessed in Manchester so far. The systemic exploitation that keeps wages barely at subsistence level while generating enormous wealth. The environmental devastation that makes every breath an assault on the lungs. The absence of effective social supports that turns any misfortune into potential catastrophe. Yet alongside these harsh realities, you've also seen remarkable resilience and solidarity, people sharing their meagre resources, communities developing mutual aid systems, workers organising to demand better conditions, charitable organisations attempting to fill the gaps left by government indifference. Manchester in 1900 contains multitudes. It's a place of terrible suffering, but also of endurance and resistance, a place where the worst excesses of industrial capitalism play out in human lives, but also where the seeds of change are being planted. As you seek shelter for another night in the city, these contradictions follow you. Tomorrow will bring new insights into the complex ecosystem of industrial poverty, the structures that create and maintain it, but also the forces working to transform it. The factories continue their relentless operation through the night, their machinery never fully silent. Manchester, the workshop of the world, does not rest, and neither do the struggles of those whose labour powers its endless production. Morning arrives with the sound of women's boots on cobblestones, hundreds of them walking in the pre-dawn darkness toward the factories and workshops that will claim their next 12 hours. You join this river of women, young and old, moving through Manchester's foggy streets like a silent army. The women don't talk much as they walk. They save their energy for the work ahead. Many carry small bundles, their midday meals of bread and perhaps a bit of cheese. Some carry infants who will spend the day in makeshift nurseries near the factories, tended by elderly women or young girls, not yet old enough for full-time work. You fall into step beside a woman in her 30s, her face already lined from years of labour. Her hands tell her story, fingers stained dark with tobacco from cigar rolling. First day, she asks, assuming you're a new worker, just trying to understand how people live here. You reply, honestly. She gives a tired laugh. Live? That's a generous word for what we do. Her name is Eliza, and she's been rolling cigars for 15 years, since she was 13. She's one of the more fortunate women workers in Manchester, earning nearly 18 shillings a week as a skilled roller, but the work is taking its toll on her health. Tobacco dust gets in your lungs, she explains, coughing slightly as if to demonstrate. Most of us don't make it past 45, but the pay's better than most women's work. Got 3 little ones to feed, haven't I? You ask about the drinking that's supposedly common among cigar makers. True enough, she admits. Some girls start as young as 14. Nothing else dulls the headaches from the tobacco. Management knows it too, practically encourages it. Keeps us coming back, doesn't it? Need the wages to pay for the gin, need the gin to keep doing the work. You've arrived at a large brick building with small, grimy windows. A sign identifies it as Wilson and Matthews Fine Tobacco Products. Women stream through the entrance, punching time cards as they enter. A supervisor watches with hawkish attention, calling out to anyone who's even seconds late. "Dock your pay, they will," Eliza mutters. 2 minutes late? That's a penny off your wages, and they wonder why we drink. She disappears into the building, joining the hundreds of women who will spend their day rolling tobacco leaves into cigars and cigarettes. The air inside is thick with dust that coats the lungs and eventually kills, but the wages are relatively good. During apprenticeship, girls earn 5 to 12 shillings a week. Skilled workers like Eliza can make 17 to 20 shillings when working full-time. That's actually remarkable compared to other women's trades. You remember the details from the transcript about women's wages. Apron makers earn 6p a dozen, expected to make 48 aprons a day for a weekly wage of 7 or 8 shillings, minus the costs of thread, light, and renting a sewing machine at 1 shilling 6p. Makers of underclothing average 5 to 9 shillings a week. The Song of the Shirt, that poem about a seamstress in wretched conditions, truly is sung nightly in hundreds of garrets and cellar kitchens throughout Manchester and Salford, as the transcript says, and always to the same doleful tune, 8 or 9 shillings a week, never more than 12. You continue your exploration, heading toward a district where many tailoresses and seamstresses live and work. The buildings here are slightly better than in Angel Meadow, but not by much. Many of the women work from home, turning their small lodgings into workshops where they sew for piece rates. In one such home workshop you meet Anne, who makes buttonholes for a tailor's shop. The room is small but neat, with a single window providing barely enough light for the detailed work. Anne sits at a small table, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she creates perfect buttonholes in waistcoats. 7 shillings a week, she says when you ask about her earnings. That's if the Opium Wars were a series of conflicts fought over the lucrative drug trade in mainland China during the 19th century. Despite having greater numbers, China would struggle against the technologically superior British, who were determined to protect their colonial interests. Ultimately, the Opium Wars would cement European hegemony in Asia by opening this once untouchable nation. Here's what life was really like during the Opium Wars. Before we start, likes and subscribes help me keep making these. Where are you listening from? Drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always reading them thinking, wait, people in New Zealand listen to history stories to sleep? We're heading to 19th century China in a minute. First, though, get comfortable. Seriously, take a second. Adjust whatever needs adjusting. You're not going to want to move once we start. The morning fog hangs thick over the Pearl River. You open your eyes in your cramped quarters aboard a British merchant ship anchored off the coast of Canton. The wooden planks creak beneath you as the vessel gently rocks. Outside, you can already hear the shouts of Chinese sampan operators ferrying goods and passengers to shore. It's 1830, and you're one of Britain's many ambitious merchants hoping to make a fortune in the China trade. Unlike your comfortable bed back home, you're sleeping on a narrow bunk in a cabin that smells of mildew, salt, and that faint hint of opium that never quite washes away. You rise and splash your face with water from a basin. The water's brackish, not like the clean glass by your bedside right now. Through the small porthole, you can see the sprawling city of Canton, the only Chinese port where foreigners like you are allowed to trade. And even here, you're restricted to a tiny area known as the 13 Factories. A small strip of land where Western merchants are corralled like expensive cattle. Morning, calls your business partner Thomas as you emerge on deck. Tea prices are up again, the company's scrambling to find enough silver to pay. This is the problem that's been giving every British merchant heartburn. Britain has developed an absolute obsession with Chinese goods. Tea especially, but also silk and porcelain. The Chinese, meanwhile, have zero interest in anything Britain produces. You know what the numbers are now? Thomas asks, pouring you a cup of Chinese tea. 7 million pounds of tea. That's how much Britain imported last year. 7 million. And how much did we sell to the Chinese? You stare into your teacup. Not enough. Not enough is right, Thomas scoffs. They don't want our wool, they don't want our cotton, they sure as hell don't want our food. All they'll take is silver, and silver is exactly what Britain is running out of. Let me paint you a picture of what's happening here. Imagine you love shopping at one particular store. You go there every week and buy everything. Your food, your clothes, your furniture. But this store won't accept your credit cards or checks. They only take gold coins. So week after week, you empty your safe, handing over more gold coins. Eventually, you're going to run out, right? That's Britain's problem with China, and it's getting worse. In your lifetime, you've watched as Britain transformed into the most powerful nation on earth. The Industrial Revolution has filled British cities with factories and smoke. The middle class is growing, and they all want the same thing: tea. The British East India Company has held a monopoly on this trade for years, but even they can't solve the basic math problem. Britain wants more Chinese goods than China wants British goods. So, Thomas says, lowering his voice conspiratorially, have you considered the other option? You know what he means immediately. Opium. Opium isn't new in China. It's been used medicinally for centuries. But the recreational smoking of opium, that's relatively new and it's spreading like wildfire. And conveniently enough, Britain controls India, where opium poppies grow beautifully. It's technically illegal, you mutter, glancing around the deck. Thomas laughs. So is breathing Chinese air without the emperor's permission. Look, everyone's doing it. We buy opium in India, sell it to Chinese smugglers here, then use that silver to buy tea. The company gets its tea, Britain keeps its silver, and we make a fortune in between. He's not wrong. Despite the Chinese emperor's official ban on opium in 1796, by the 1820s, opium has become Britain's unofficial solution to its trade problem, and it's working. The trade deficit is reversing. Have you seen an opium den yet? Thomas asks. You shake your head. Come on then, he says, heading toward the ship's boat. Educational purposes only. The trip to shore in the small rowboat takes about 20 minutes. The water of the Pearl River is brown and clouded with waste from the thousands of boats and the city itself. Not exactly the crystal clear waters of vacation brochures. Canton sprawls before you, a city of over 1 million people crammed into narrow streets and alleys, but you won't be seeing much of it. As a foreign devil, or fan gui as the Chinese call you, you're restricted to the small trading area near the waterfront. This way, Thomas says, leading you through the narrow streets of the foreign quarter. You pass other Europeans in Western dress, Chinese merchants in traditional robes, and street vendors selling steaming bowls of congee and dumplings. The smell hits you first, a sickly sweet aroma that reminds you vaguely of burning sugar and something more medicinal. Thomas ducks down an alleyway and knocks 3 times on a nondescript door. It opens just enough to reveal a pair of suspicious eyes. Thomas mutters something in pidgin Chinese, and the door swings open. Inside, the room is dimly lit and hazy with smoke. On simple wooden platforms lie perhaps a dozen Chinese men, each with a long pipe, their eyes glazed over in various states of intoxication. "Jesus," you whisper. "British entrepreneurship at its finest," Thomas says with a smirk. "From India to China to Britain's teacups, the perfect triangle." You're watching the destruction of lives in real time. Some of these men look like they haven't moved in days. Their skin is sallow, their bodies thin. They get addicted fast, Thomas explains, speaking as if discussing the weather. Once they start, they need more and more. Good for business, obviously. "How much is coming in now?" you ask. "About 4,500 chests per year. Each chest holds around 140 pounds of opium." Do the math. That's over 600,000 pounds of opium pouring into China annually, and growing. The Chinese government is trying to stop it, Thomas continues as you leave the den, the sweet smoke clinging to your clothes. But their own officials are getting rich off bribes. Hard to stop something when the people enforcing the ban are taking payoffs to look the other way. Back in the foreign quarter, you pass the offices of Jardine, Matheson & Co., one of the largest British trading firms. They've built a fortune on opium. Their ships sail from India laden with the drug, transfer it to smaller vessels outside Chinese waters, then Chinese smugglers bring it ashore at night. The emperor can ban it all he wants, Thomas says, but as long as Chinese people want to smoke it and Chinese officials want bribes to ignore it, the trade will continue. You stop at a tea house where several British merchants are gathered around a table, arguing heatedly. The company's monopoly is ending next year, one says. Parliament's opening the China trade to everyone. About bloody time, another replies. The East India Company's had their chance. Let the rest of us have a go. This is big news. Since 1600, the British East India Company has had a stranglehold on trade with the East. Its monopoly made it effectively a state within a state with its own army and territories. But times are changing. The idea of free trade is taking hold in Britain, and monopolies are falling out of favour. What none of you realise yet is how this change will accelerate events. With the company's monopoly gone, more British merchants will flood into China, all competing for profits, and many will turn to the one commodity guaranteed to make money: opium. Mark my words, on table says, lowering his voice. "The Chinese will eventually crack down for real. Then what? Will Britain protect our interests?" It's a question that hangs in the air. Britain, flexing the naval muscle of its growing empire, has never been shy about using force to protect trade. But war with China, the very idea seems absurd. China is ancient, vast, populous, the celestial empire, as they call themselves, viewing their emperor as ruling all under heaven. "They won't touch us," Thomas says confidently. "They need our trade too much." He's wrong, but you won't know that for a few more years. As the sun begins to set, you return to the ship. From the deck, Canton glows with lantern light. It's beautiful in its way, this ancient city on the edge of an empire that considers itself the centre of the world. What you're witnessing, though you don't fully realize it yet, is the collision of two worlds. On one side is China, ancient, proud, self-sufficient, but increasingly corrupt and stagnant. On the other is Britain, industrializing, expansionist, hungry for markets, and absolutely convinced of its own superiority. And bridging these worlds is opium, a drug that's slowly poisoning one society while enriching the other. You sleep uneasily that night, the sweet smell of the opium den still lingering in your nostrils. In your dreams, you see those glazed eyes staring back at you, silently asking what right you have to profit from their destruction. But business is business, and by the light of the next morning, such moral qualms seem distant and impractical. Over the next few years, you watch the trade grow. After the East India Company loses its monopoly in 1833, private merchants flood into Canton. Competition drives innovation, faster ships, better smuggling techniques, more efficient networks. The Chinese response is inconsistent at best. Some officials take bribes and look the other way. Others make a show of cracking down, only to release seized opium back to smugglers for a price. It's a system built on corruption and denial. By 1836, opium imports have more than tripled from when you first arrived, reaching 30,000 chests annually. That's over £4 million of opium. The numbers don't lie, Thomas tells you one evening as you review the accounts. He's gotten richer, bought his own ship, expanded his operations. 20 years ago, China had a massive trade surplus with Britain. Now, we've reversed it. They're hemorrhaging silver. You can see it in the exchange rates. The Chinese unit of silver, the tael, has become more valuable as silver grows scarcer in China. Basic economics. They can't ignore it forever, you say. Thomas shrugs. Maybe not. But what can they do? Ban it harder? The answer comes in 1839, and it's not what any of you expected. The Emperor Daoguang, increasingly alarmed by the spread of opium addiction and the drain of silver from his country, decides enough is enough. He appoints a special commissioner named Lin Zexu with a single mission: end the opium trade once and for all. Commissioner Lin arrives in Canton in March 1839, and he's not playing around. This Lin fellow means business, Thomas says, bursting into your quarters one morning. He's arrested over 1,700 Chinese dealers already, made the local magistrate hand over his own son for punishment. Lin doesn't stop with Chinese dealers. He turns his attention to the source, the foreign merchants who bring opium to China's shores. In a bold move, he writes directly to Queen Victoria herself. Your Majesty, Thomas reads aloud from a translated copy circulating among the merchants. How can you let your subjects bring such harmful things to another country? Your nation makes laws against opium. Why would you then sell it to us? It's a fair question. Opium is strictly controlled back in Britain. Laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, is available as medicine, but the pure opium being sold to China would never be permitted for recreational use at home. But Lin's letter never reaches the Queen, and even if it had, British trade interests would likely have prevailed over moral considerations. Commissioner Lin escalates. He demands that all foreign merchants surrender their opium stocks for destruction. When they refuse, he blockades the foreign quarter, cutting off food and supplies. He's trapping us like rats, Thomas fumes. No one in, no one out, until we hand over the opium. The British Superintendent of Trade, Charles Elliot, finds himself in an impossible position. He orders the merchants to surrender their opium, promising they'll be compensated by the British government. Reluctantly, they comply. Over the next few weeks, you watch from your ship as thousands of chests of opium are surrendered to Lin's forces. The value is staggering. Millions of pounds worth of opium, the product of countless acres of Indian poppy fields and years of trade. Lin's men take the opium to a beach outside Canton. There they dig enormous trenches, fill them with the drug, add salt and lime, then flush the mixture out to sea with water. It takes weeks to destroy it all. 20,000 chests, Thomas says quietly as you watch from a distance. Over £2 million of opium. Gone. The destruction of the opium should have been the end of it. Lin had eliminated the immediate supply and sent a clear message. But there's a problem. The British merchants, yourself included, still want to be paid for that opium, and not by the British government, by the Chinese. It was their government that took our property, as one merchant puts it. They should pay for it. Commissioner Lin, however, sees things differently. In his view, he's confiscated contraband, illegal goods that shouldn't have been in China in the first place. The very idea that China should pay compensation for destroying an illegal drug being smuggled into the country seems absurd to him. This impasse might have remained a commercial dispute, but events are about to push it toward war. One hot night in July 1839, a group of drunken British and American sailors row ashore to a village outside Canton. An argument breaks out with the locals. In the scuffle, a Chinese man named Lin Waxy is killed. Commissioner Lin demands the sailors be handed over for trial under Chinese law. Nine some see, could mean execution. They'll behead them all, Thomas exclaims when the news spreads through the merchant community. The British refuse to hand over their citizens to the Chinese legal system. Instead, the sailors are tried in a British court, receiving what the Chinese view as a laughably light sentence. Lin, furious at this defiance, takes drastic action. He orders all Chinese servants to leave the foreign quarter and forbids the sale of food to the British. He's trying to starve us out, Thomas says grimly, forces our hand. With tensions escalating daily, British ships fire on Chinese war junks in what will later be called the Battle of Kowloon, the first military engagement of what's about to become the First Opium War. You stand on the deck of your ship, watching the smoke rise from the battle in the distance. This trade dispute over drugs has just become something much larger, a clash between empires with vastly different worldviews and power dynamics. And you, along with every other merchant in Canton, are caught in the middle of what will become one of the most consequential conflicts of the century. War, Thomas says quietly beside you, over opium. Who would have thought? But of course, it's about more than just opium. It's about sovereignty, trade rights, diplomatic equality, all the complex issues that arise when two powerful civilizations collide. And as night falls over Canton, neither you nor anyone else can predict just how dramatically this war will reshape China, Britain, and the balance of power in Asia for the next century. The news arrives on your desk like a death sentence. 23 more cases yesterday, High Magistrate, your assistant says quietly, placing the report before you. 3 dead from overdose. 1 entire family sold their ancestral home for opium money. You rub your temples, feeling the weight of your official hat, the symbol of your rank in the Qing bureaucracy. Outside your window, Canton continues its business in the pale morning light, the same Canton you've sworn to protect as a regional magistrate. The year is 1838 and you're drowning in reports of opium. What began as a trickle has become a flood that threatens to sweep away the very foundations of Chinese society. Any more seizures? You ask. Your assistant shakes his head. The smugglers are getting smarter. They're bribing the Coast Guard now. Of course they are. The corruption spreads as fast as the addiction itself. You rise from your desk and walk to the window. From here you can see the foreign quarter, the 13 factories where the British, Americans and other foreigners conduct their business. Beyond that, the Pearl River, crowded with ships from around the world. It wasn't always like this. You remember when foreign trade was manageable, controlled through the Kohong, the Guild of Chinese merchants authorized to deal with foreigners. The system worked for centuries. Foreigners stayed in their designated area, followed Chinese laws, and trade benefited everyone. But opium changed everything. Another report from Fujian province. Your assistant continues, handing you another scroll. The governor estimates 1 in 4 adult males now smokes opium. 1 in 4. The number stuns you. In some coastal villages, it's even worse. Entire male populations addicted, unable to work, spending every copper coin on the drug. And the silver, your assistant's expression darkens, continuing to flow out. Exchange rates are rising weekly. This might be the most dangerous aspect of all. For centuries, China's economy has run on silver. Now, so much silver is leaving the country to pay for opium that the entire economic system is under threat. You've seen the effects firsthand. Last week, you visited a village where farmers couldn't afford seed for the next planting season because the price in silver had risen so high. If this continues, famine isn't far behind. The emperor is aware, you ask? Very. There are rumours he's appointing a special commissioner. You've heard these rumours too. Emperor Daoguang is known to be deeply troubled by the opium crisis. Unlike some of his predecessors who lived in blissful isolation in the Forbidden City, Daoguang seems to understand the existential threat opium poses. Later that day, you attend a meeting of local officials at the governor's compound. The mood is grim. One after another, officials report on the spread of opium addiction in their districts. My Coast Guard seized 3 small boats last week, says a maritime official. Over 200 pounds of opium bound for inland distribution. That's nothing, scoffs another. For every boat you catch, 20 slip through. An older official speaks up. In my 50 years of service, I've never seen a threat like this. The barbarians are waging war on us without firing a shot. There's murmured agreement around the table. You notice some officials shifting uncomfortably. Those who you suspect are taking bribes from smugglers. What do we do? Someone finally asks. We've banned it repeatedly. The Emperor's decrees mean nothing if we cannot enforce them. The governor, a thin man with a wispy beard, looks around the table. I've received word from Beijing. The emperor is indeed appointing a special commissioner with extraordinary powers. Lin Zexu, the viceroy of Huguang. A ripple of surprise runs through the room. Lin Zexu is known throughout the bureaucracy as incorruptible, intelligent, and effective. A true Confucian scholar official of the old school. When does he arrive, you ask? Spring, the governor replies, and he comes with the emperor's full authority. As the meeting disperses, an older colleague pulls you aside. You've been to the foreign quarter, haven't you? Speak their devil language? You nod cautiously. Unlike most officials, you've made it a point to learn some English and to understand how the foreigners think. Lin will need men who understand the barbarians, he says. Be ready. The months pass, and the situation only worsens. The streets of Canton now feature a new, haunting sight. Opium addicts in the final stages, their bodies wasted, skin hanging from bones, eyes hollow and desperate. You remember one man particularly, a scholar who once wrote beautiful poetry. Now he lies in an alley, pipe in hand, his talented fingers stained yellow, his mind lost in opium dreams. For him, the Middle Kingdom has already fallen. Spring arrives with peach blossoms and a flurry of activity. Commissioner Lin enters Canton with all the ceremony befitting his rank, drums, banners, and a procession of guards and officials stretching half a mile. You're summoned to his temporary residence the very next day. Lin Zexu is not what you expected. In place of an imposing figure, you find a slight, scholarly man with bright, intelligent eyes that seem to look straight through you. You speak the barbarian tongue? He asks without preamble. Some, Excellency. Enough to communicate. Lin nods, gesturing to a chair. Tell me what you've observed. For the next hour, you detail everything you've seen of the opium trade. The smuggling networks, the corruption, the addiction, the economic damage. Lin listens intently, occasionally making notes with a brush. When you finish, he sits in silence for a long moment. The Emperor has given me a clear mandate, he finally says. End the opium trade, by any means necessary. The steel in his voice leaves no doubt that he means exactly what he says. I will need men I can trust, he continues. Men who cannot be bought. Will you serve directly under me? It's a dangerous assignment. You'll make powerful enemies among corrupt officials and opium merchants. But you bow your head anyway. It would be my honour, Excellency. What follows is a whirlwind of activity. Lin moves with astonishing speed and determination. Within days, he's arrested prominent Chinese opium dealers. Some are executed publicly as a warning, others are sent to exile in the harsh western frontier. But Lin knows the source of the problem lies with the foreign merchants who bring the opium to China's shores. He summons the Hong merchants, the Chinese middlemen who deal with foreigners. You will deliver this command to every foreign factory, he tells them. Surrender all opium in their possession within 3 days. Further, they must sign bonds promising never to bring opium to China again, on penalty of death. The Hong merchants blanch. Excellency, they will refuse. Then they will face the consequences. Later that night, you find Lin at his desk, writing by candlelight. You've been assigned as his liaison to the foreign community, translating his proclamations and reporting their responses. They're in shock, you tell him. The British Superintendent, Elliot, has arrived from Macau to deal with the crisis personally. Lin doesn't look up from his writing. Good. A man of authority. Perhaps he can control his merchants better than his predecessors. You glance at the document he's working on. It's a letter written in formal, elegant Chinese. May I ask what you're writing, Excellency? Lin pauses, setting down his brush. A letter to the Queen of England, Victoria. You can't hide your surprise. Directly to their ruler? Why not? Ruler to ruler. I explain the harm opium does to our people. I appeal to her moral sense. Surely she would not allow such evil to be perpetrated in her own country. Why then permit her subjects to poison ours? The logic is impeccable. But you've studied the British enough to know the letter will never reach Victoria. And even if it did, commercial interests would prevail over moral arguments. But Lin's sincerity moves you. He truly believes reason and virtue will triumph. The deadline passes. As predicted, the foreign merchants refuse to surrender their opium or sign the bonds. Lin's response is immediate and dramatic. No Chinese shall serve the foreign factories, he decrees. No food shall be sold to them. No one shall enter or leave the foreign quarter until they comply. It's an ancient siege tactic applied to trade diplomacy, and remarkably, it works, partly. After 6 weeks of confinement, the British Superintendent Elliot capitulates. He orders British merchants to surrender their opium, promising them compensation from the British government. Over the next few days, more than 20,000 chests of opium, £2.6 million of the drug, are handed over to Chinese authorities. You're present at the handover, watching as cart after cart of the dark, sticky substance arrives at the collection point. The British merchants look furious, none more so than William Jardine and James Matheson, whose company is the largest opium importer. This is theft, Jardine spits when he sees you. Your government will pay for this. You maintain your composure. Your opium has destroyed countless lives, Mr. Jardine. My government is protecting its people. Jardine's face reddens. This isn't about opium, it's about trade. Free trade, a concept your backward empire can't grasp. The exchange haunts you later. To Jardine, this is just business, impersonal, rational. He doesn't see the hollow-eyed addicts, the families destroyed, the villages emptied of silver. Commissioner Lin is triumphant. At Human, just outside Canton, he oversees the destruction of the seized opium in specially dug trenches. The process takes weeks. Workers mix the opium with salt, lime, and water, then flush the mixture into the sea. The smell is overwhelming, a sickly sweet odour that clings to your clothes and hair. You find yourself retching alongside many of the workers. A necessary evil, Lin says, standing beside you as another batch is destroyed. We must cleanse our nation of this poison, but even in this moment of victory, you sense trouble ahead. The British merchants have retreated to Macau, then to ships anchored off the coast. Rumours swirl that Jardine has returned to London to lobby for military intervention. Commissioner Lin, however, believes the matter settled. He's fulfilled the Emperor's command. The opium has been seized and destroyed, and bonds have been signed promising no more will be imported. In the following weeks, Lin continues his campaign. He establishes a naval blockade to search incoming ships. He rewards informants who report smuggling. He punishes corrupt officials who facilitated the trade. One evening, as summer heat hangs heavy over Canton, you join Lin on the veranda of his residence. Below, lanterns illuminate the city as night falls. The Emperor is pleased, Lin says, sipping his tea. He has awarded me the title of Grand Secretary. A well-deserved honour, Excellency. Lin studies you for a moment. You look troubled. You hesitate, then decide honesty is best. I fear the British will not accept this outcome. They've lost millions of dollars worth of opium. Their pride is wounded, and they have the naval power to respond. Lin considers this. Perhaps, but right is on our side. The moral law of heaven supports our cause. The British have cannons, Excellency, and steamships. Lin smiles slightly. You admire their technology. I fear it, you correct him. I've seen their ships, their weapons. We have nothing comparable. Numbers are on our side. The Celestial Empire has stood for thousands of years. What are a few barbarian ships against the will of heaven? You wish you shared his confidence. But you've studied British military campaigns in India, Burma, and elsewhere. They may be few, but their technological advantage is overwhelming. Later that week, news arrives of an incident that will change everything. Some drunken British and American sailors have killed a Chinese villager named Lin Waxy during a brawl. Commissioner Lin demands the foreigners be handed over for trial under Chinese law. The British refuse, trying the sailors in their own court and imposing light sentences. Lin is furious. They kill one of our people and claim the right to judge the crime themselves. This cannot stand. He escalates again, ordering all Chinese servants to leave the foreign quarter and forbidding food sales to the British. It's a miscalculation. The British ships, now anchored at Hong Kong, respond by attacking Chinese junks in what becomes known as the Battle of Kowloon. The first shots of the Opium War have been fired. That night, as reports of the skirmish reach Canton, you find Lin again at his desk, writing by candlelight. He looks older suddenly, the weight of events pressing down on his shoulders. What are you writing, Excellency? A report to the Emperor. I've requested reinforcements for the coastal defences. You nod, knowing it won't be enough. Not against British warships, but Lin, for all his wisdom, doesn't understand the threat. Few in the imperial court do. China has been the centre of its world for so long that it cannot imagine being truly threatened by a small island nation from the other side of the globe. The British Parliament is discussing war, you tell him, reporting what you've heard from your sources. Jardine is pushing for a military expedition. Lin sets down his brush. For the first time since you've known him, he looks uncertain. Why? We've acted according to our laws. Opium is banned. We seized contraband. What nation would go to war over the right to poison another? It's a reasonable question, but reason has little to do with what's coming. In the months that follow, tension builds along the coast. Small skirmishes break out between Chinese junks and British ships. In Canton, the foreign factories remain empty, trade at a standstill. You continue to serve under Lin, but increasingly you're sending reports rather than receiving instructions. He's been recalled to Beijing to explain the deteriorating situation to the emperor. Before he leaves, he calls you to his residence one last time. "I failed to understand them," he says quietly. "The barbarians. Their ways are more alien than I knew." It's the closest he'll come to admitting he miscalculated. "You did what was right," you assure him. Perhaps, but right is not always enough. Lin's departure leaves a void in Canton. Other officials, less determined and more corrupt, begin to walk back some of his stricter policies. The opium trade, momentarily disrupted, starts to resume through different channels. Then, in June 1840, nearly a year after the opium destruction, the news you've been dreading arrives. A British fleet has reached Chinese waters. 16 warships, 4 armed steamers, and 28 transports carrying 4,000 troops. The First Opium War has officially begun, though no formal declaration has been made. It's a war unlike any China has faced before. Not a border conflict with nomadic tribes or a dynastic rebellion, but a clash with a technologically superior foreign power driven by commercial interests. As you watch the sun set over Canton that evening, you